If he's a Navy SEAL, then I'm the president. The man at the center table chuckled, raising his coffee mug with a smirk. 3 others joined in, their laughter curling through the diner like smoke. Faint, bitter, and dismissive. At table 9, near the frosted windowpane streaked with early autumn drizzle, sat a man who said nothing. His eggs had gone cold. His hands trembled slightly around a chipped ceramic mug. And on his left wrist, barely visible beneath the cuff of a worn denim jacket, rested a faded tattoo, an anchor crossed by a dagger. No one in the room recognized it. One person did, but he hadn't arrived yet. That man's name was Calvin Holt. That tattoo had once saved lives. And before this quiet Sunday morning was over, it would change everything. Thank you for being here. Sometimes, the smallest moments carry the greatest meaning. Today's story is one of those, quiet, powerful, and worth remembering. If it touches your heart, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like more stories like this, you're warmly invited to subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss the next one. Now, let's take a closer look at what really happened. Emberbrook wasn't famous for much, a small town nestled between the rust-colored hills of Tennessee and the slow curl of the Whispering River. It had one blinking stoplight, 2 churches, and a diner with wallpaper older than most of its customers. On Sunday mornings, that diner, Miller's Table, was the beating heart of the town. By 8:30 a.m., the booths were full. Retired factory men, faded veterans in baseball caps, mothers with toddlers fresh from early service. The coffee was bitter. The eggs came in only 2 forms, scrambled or burnt. But it was the routine that people loved. The ritual of forks scraping plates, the soft hum of country gospel from the ceiling speaker, and the chime of the front bell each time someone pushed through the glass door with cold wind behind them. That morning, like many others, Calvin Holt had arrived early. He took the same seat, table 9 by the window, the one closest to the emergency exit and farthest from the coffee bar. The others barely looked up. Most didn't know his name. Some assumed he was a drifter, maybe a widower. He never came with anyone, never smiled, never ordered anything but the vet's special. Scrambled eggs, dry toast, no substitutions. He left $1 on the table and walked out before the lunch crowd rolled in. The only thing unusual about him, if anyone bothered to look, was the tattoo. Faded blue ink, a dagger piercing through an anchor, barely visible under the cuff of his left sleeve. The kind of design no one got for fashion. The kind of mark you earned. But to the 4 men laughing at the center table and matching Elk Ridge Golf Club jackets, it meant nothing. Bet he drew that thing in a gas station bathroom. One of them muttered, "Looks more like a prison tat than a service mark." Another said, "They didn't whisper. They never did." From behind the counter, Savannah Mendez, 17, working her second week at Miller's, watched it all unfold. She didn't know Calvin Holt. Not really, but she'd seen him come in. Always early, always quiet, always alone. He walked with a cane, favoring his left side. His right leg, she noticed, had an odd rigidity to it. Mechanical, maybe. She didn't ask. No one asked. He didn't offer. But there was something about the way he handled that coffee cup, like it was the only warm thing he'd had in days. Both hands wrapped around it, knuckles white with effort. Savannah had grown up in Emberbrook. Her granddad had been a WBY vet. Her cousin had just joined the Army Reserves. And though she didn't know what the anchor dagger tattoo meant, she knew how people carried weight in silence. She turned toward the kitchen, biting her lip. That's when the diner's manager, Rick Dalton, appeared. Clipboard tucked under his arm, corporate smile plastered on his face. He leaned over Calvin's table. "Sir," he began, voice low but loud enough to carry. "We've had a few complaints. Some guests say they're feeling uncomfortable. Would you mind moving to the patio area?" The room didn't fall silent, but something shifted. A fork paused mid-air. The soft country song skipped once. Calvin didn't speak. He just nodded once, a small, resigned motion. The kind that said, "I've been here before. This isn't the first time." He picked up his tray, gathered his cane, and turned toward the door without protest. As he passed the men in golf jackets, one of them leaned back in his seat and smirked. "If he's a Navy SEAL, then I'm the president." Lauder followed him out into the cold. Savannah stood frozen behind the counter, her hands curled into fists. She didn't know what to do. She was just a high school senior working weekends. No one had trained her for this. Outside, the sky had turned a dull pewter gray. A bitter wind rolled down Main Street, tugging at napkins left on patio tables and flipping the corners of laminated menace. Calvin Holt sat alone, near the edge of the patio, hunched slightly. His coffee had begun to steam again. Not because it was hot, but because the air around him was so cold. The prosthetic leg beneath his jeans creaked once as he adjusted in his seat. He didn't touch his eggs, just stared at the horizon, past the river, past the tree line, like he was trying to remember something the rest of the world had forgotten. Inside, Rick scribbled something on his clipboard and disappeared back into the kitchen. The golf jacket crew went back to their conversation, though with a little less volume now. Savannah kept watching the window. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the way the old man hadn't looked surprised. Maybe it was how the laughter didn't seem to hurt him anymore. Only exhaust him, like it was a weight he carried every Sunday. The clock behind the counter ticked to 8:46 a.m., and then the doorbell jingled. The bell over the diner door jingled with the same casual chime it always made, just a sound easily ignored. But not this time, because when Lieutenant Jackson Carr stepped inside, everything changed. He didn't look like most Emberbrook locals. Early 30s. Cropped hair. Black field jacket zipped to the collar. Not flashy, just sharp. Everything about him was tidy, deliberate. You could tell by the way he walked that he was trained to observe before he spoke. That he could spot weakness across a battlefield. Or a breakfast room. He didn't scan the menu. Didn't greet the hostess. His eyes locked immediately on the empty seat at table 9. Then through the window. Then onto the thin wrist of the man outside, where the morning sun had caught a glimpse of ink that no one else had bothered to understand. And just like that, Jackson Carr stopped moving. The room did too. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Coffee cups hung frozen halfway to lips. The country song skipped again, then silenced altogether, as if the universe knew it was no longer welcome. From behind the counter, Savannah stared. She didn't know who this man was, but she knew what a reckoning looked like, and it had just walked in. Jackson stepped toward the window. Outside, Calvin Holt sat exactly as he had minutes before, alone, shoulders drawn inward, his hand gripping a cane like a rifle across unfamiliar terrain. The tattoo on his wrist, faded blue dagger through an anchor, was now unmistakably visible. Jackson's chest tightened. His breath caught. He didn't need a name. That tattoo was all the confirmation he needed. Only a handful of men had ever worn it, and one of them, one of the last still living, was sitting outside Miller's table, eating cold, scrambled eggs and pretending the laughter from inside didn't reach him. Jackson turned and walked past the center booth, the 4 men in golf jackets falling quiet one by one as he passed. He didn't look at them. He didn't have to. He pushed open the patio door. The wind met him with a slap of dry leaves and the metallic tang of coming rain. Calvin looked up. His eyes squinted at first, then widened slightly, not with fear but recognition. Something ancient passed between them, something wordless. Something heavy. Jackson stood 2 feet from the table, straight-backed, chin high, shoulders squared. Then, in front of the entire diner, before the town, the tourists, and the men who had mocked a stranger with a limp, he raised his right hand in a perfect, reverent salute. "Sir," he said, loud enough for everyone inside to hear. "Are you Calvin Holt of Extraction Team Echo, designation G7, silence." Then a gust of wind swept through, lifting the edge of Calvin's jacket sleeve just enough to expose the full tattoo. The ink was worn, yes, but clear. There was no mistaking it now. Calvin blinked, his jaw slackened. He opened his mouth. No words came. His left hand, shaking just slightly, tapped the table gently. A motion that meant yes. Jackson didn't drop the salute. He spoke again, voice softer but firm. "Sir, permission to sit." Calvin gave a slow nod. Jackson took the seat across from him. No fanfare, no ceremony, just respect. Inside, no one moved, not Rick, not the men at the center table, not Savannah, whose hands had curled around the edges of the coffee pot without realizing it. This wasn't just some reunion. This was recognition. Jackson turned to the window and raised his voice just enough for it to carry. This man, he said, designed the extraction protocols we still use in modern combat zones. He's the one who saved a forward ops unit under fire in the Wadi Dalera incident, without a working radio. His designation was G7. Only 8 operators in that team. Only one made it home. He looked toward the center table. If anyone here feels uncomfortable in the presence of a living legend, maybe you're the ones who should be eating outside. The insult had no volume. Just wait. One of the men pushed back his chair and stood, awkward and pale. Another followed. Their faces were flushed, but they didn't argue. They didn't have the right to. By the time Jackson turned back to Calvin, only 2 of the 4 men remained, and both were quietly studying their mugs, hoping the hot coffee might burn away the shame rising in their throats. Calvin's mouth twitched. Not a smile exactly. Just a flicker of something close to a peace. The kind that comes not from praise, but from finally being seen. Savannah moved without thinking. She pushed through the kitchen door, a fresh pot of coffee in her hand, and walked onto the patio. Her legs trembled slightly. She didn't know what to say. So she didn't speak. She just poured a cup for Calvin, then one for Jackson. Jackson nodded. "Thank you, ma'am." Savannah hesitated. Then, without fully understanding why, she reached into her apron and pulled out a folded photograph. An old black and white, worn soft at the corners. She placed it gently on the table. 2 young men in jungle fatigues stood grinning near a rusted truck. One of them wore a dagger, an anchor tattoo on his left wrist. The other, "My grandfather," she whispered. "James Harrington." Calvin's breath hitched. He picked up the photo with fingers like leaves in the wind. His eyes locked on the image. Then he looked up at her, truly looked. "He'd promised he'd buy the first burger when we got home," Calvin said, his voice low, worn from dessous. Savannah smiled through tears. "He told me you were the reason he did." Calvin nodded slowly. "You was the best of us." "You were too," she replied. And the moment stretched. Not dramatic, not loud, but sacred. Jackson remained quiet, phone in hand. He snapped one photo, no flash, no posing, just what was there, an old warrior. A symbol almost forgotten, a young girl holding memory, and a nation silent behind them, remembering. The photo went online at 11:14 a.m., no hashtags, no dramatic caption, just 5 words. "Some heroes don't wear uniforms." Jackson Carr hadn't told anyone he'd posted it. Didn't tag the location. Didn't say who the man was. But the internet knew how to listen, when it wanted to. By sunset, the image had been shared 20,000 times. By midnight, that number doubled. By Monday morning, everyone knew who Calvin Holt was. Savannah didn't even know the photo had gone viral until she got to the diner and saw the line wrapping around the building. Reporters, veterans, families with framed medals, children in school uniforms holding flags drawn in crayon. Inside, table 9 remained empty. By choice. A fresh placard had been taped to the wood, reserved in memory of those who served in silence. Rick Dalton, the manager, tried to dodge the news crews. He told people the patio thing was misunderstanding, that we support all veterans here. No one bought it. Savannah, however, didn't hide. When the cameras turned to her, she spoke plainly. From the heart, what she'd seen. What she hadn't said that day, and why it mattered that a man like Calvin Holt no longer be allowed to disappear. Then came the letters. By Thursday, Savannah was carrying a shoebox into the diner. By Friday, there were 5. Letters from veterans. From old soldiers in nursing homes, children of Marines, widows who still wore dog tags under their blouses. They all wrote the same thing in different words. "We remember. We thought G7 was a legend. He's the reason my father came home." Then came the ones from kids. Simple drawings. Shaky letters. Envelopes sealed with crooked tape. One stood out. "Dear Mr. Holt, my grandpa cried when he saw your picture. He said you saved him. Thank you." Calvin didn't know what to do with the letters at first. He brought a bundle to Savannah and said, "You'll know what to do." She copied a few, posted them on the diner's bulletin board. She framed one, taped another to the patio door with a note, "If you know Calvin Holt, say thank you." Then, the mayor called. She asked if Calvin would consider speaking at Emberbrook's annual Veterans Day ceremony. He didn't say yes right away. He sat with it, held the phone for a long time in his oil-stained hand, thumb rubbing at the calloused groove beneath the tattoo. Finally, he said, "If it helps someone else feel remembered, I'll go." The Emberbrook Community Center hadn't seen a crowd like that in years. People stood shoulder to shoulder. Kids sat cross-legged in the aisles. Reporters ran extension cords across the floor to prop up their cameras. But no one jostled. No one interrupted. When Calvin walked to the podium, the room stood. He wore a clean, button-down shirt. His prosthetic leg was polished. His sleeve was rolled just enough to reveal the tattoo, not in defiance, but in remembrance. He spoke only once. "I'm not a hero. I'm not a legend. I just did the right thing and tried to live quiet after. But if what I did helped someone, I'd do it again tomorrow." Then he stepped back. The room didn't cheer. They wept and stood in silence. Because silence sometimes says more than applause ever could. After that, something in Emberbrook shifted. People waved at Calvin on Main Street. Kids ran up to him after school asking about the tattoo. He didn't answer most questions, but he'd nod, tip his cap, and tell them to listen to their grandfathers. The garage he ran, Holt and Sons, though he had no sons, suddenly had a waiting list. One Saturday morning, a group of teens showed up with ladders and paint buckets. No announcement, no permission. "We're here to clean up the place, sir," one said. Calvin grumbled about the noise, but he let them stay. The following week, someone fixed the squeaky gate. Then the roof. Then 2 Marines stopped by with a box of new tools. "Figured you could use these," they said. Calvin didn't ask for any of it. He just nodded. Let them help. Then got back to work. Because that's who he was. And then came his 85th birthday. He told Savannah he didn't want a party. Said he was fine with black coffee and dry toast. But the town had other plans. At 8:55 a.m., Savannah stepped out of the diner and saw them 3 black SUVs, 2 Humvees, 7 Navy SEALs in full dress uniform, and 1 woman stepping out of the last vehicle, holding a folded flag in a small wooden box. Sarah Harrington, Savannah's cousin, the granddaughter of James Harrington. She approached slowly. "Hey," she said, voice trembling. "You probably don't remember me." Calvin blinked. "I do. You have your grandfather's eyes." She smiled, already fighting tears. "We came to say thank you. And to honor your birthday." Each SEAL stepped forward one by one. Each saluted. Then Sarah handed him the box. Inside was a medallion from the Navy SEAL Historical Foundation, engraved with his name, his team, and 4 words, "For service above silence." Calvin stared at it. He whispered, "I thought they'd forgotten." Sarah placed her hand over his. "We never did." In that moment, he wasn't 85. He was 25 again, in the jungle, carrying his teammate through smoke and silence. The last one left to remember. But not anymore. Not alone. Not unseen. In the spring after his 85th birthday, the mayor of Emberbrook held a quiet vote with the city council. No press release. No ceremony. Just a single proposal: rename the road in front of Holt's garage. Not after a mayor. Not after a bank. Not after a developer. But after a man who never asked for his name to be known. 3 weeks later, they installed a new street sign. Simple. White letters. Black pole. Silent Service Way. In honor of Calvin Holt, G7 Extraction Team Echo. Honor the quiet ones. There was no ribbon cutting. Just a small American flag planted beneath the sign. Calvin showed up the next morning like he always did. Coffee in hand, toolbox in the other. He paused at the corner, stared at the sign for a long time. Then he gave it a small nod, and kept walking. Because that's who he was. He kept working at the garage. Slower now. Kids dropped by after school just to hear him say a few words. Veterans showed up with faded photos and firm handshakes. Sometimes, if the afternoon was especially quiet, Calvin would tell them stories. Not the kind in history books, but the kind that lived in the back of old notebooks. Mud, fire, silence, promise. He never used the word arrow. He preferred, "I just finished the job." And then came the morning no one expected. Late September. Crisp air. Flags at half-staff. Calvin Holt passed away in his sleep. No pain, no noise. Just peace. The town stopped. Miller's table closed early. The high school canceled classes. By noon, hundreds gathered at Little Rock Chapel, the weathered white church on the hill. People arrived in work boots and dress blues, choir robes and old fatigues that hadn't been buttoned in decades. They came because they knew. They came because they remembered. There was no eulogy, no slideshow, no long reading of accolades. Just one hymn, slow and low, as though it tiptoed across the walls. 6 Navy SEALs, including Jackson Carr, flew in from across the country, not because they had to, but because when a man like Calvin goes home, you show up. They carried the casket with reverence. Sarah Harrington walked forward near the end. She held the same photo Savannah had once laid on the diner table, 2 men in jungle gear. A tattoo, a promise. She placed it on the casket, whispering, "You kept the promise. For both of you." On the headstone, beneath Calvin Holt's name were just a few words. He didn't ask for it. They just knew. And below that, his silence spoke volumes. His service changed lives. Back at Miller's table, the corner booth remains empty. A brass plaque is bolted to the table, reserved in memory of Calvin Holt. Extraction Team G7. Silent Service Way. Tourists sometimes ask who he was. Locals just point to the sign outside and smile. Calvin Holt never asked to be noticed. He never told his story, not because it wasn't worth telling, but because he believed others had given more. But here's the truth: sometimes, the loudest legacy comes from those who never speak of it. Sometimes, the quiet ones carry the heaviest burdens, so the rest of us can walk lighter. In a world obsessed with recognition, titles, and applause, we often forget that dignity doesn't need a spotlight. This story is a reminder that a service isn't always worn on a sleeve. Sometimes it's etched into skin and silence. A respect isn't something we give when convenient, but something we owe to those who made our comfort possible. And most of all, some promises live longer than memory. They pass from one hand to the next, one generation to another, like a quiet torch in the dark. Calvin didn't just save lives in war. He showed us how to live with humility, how to age with grace, and how to carry meaning in silence. And that is a lesson we all need right now. Thank you for being here. If this story touched your heart, let it live on. Leave a comment. Share it with someone who may need to hear it. And if you believe stories like Calvin's deserve to be told, you're warmly invited to subscribe and tap the bell, so we can keep honoring the quiet heroes one story at a time. See you in the next one.